Elena never thought her life would fall apart over a plate of overpriced steak. But there she was, dressed in his favorite red dress, nails painted the color he always said made her look dangerous. She'd spent an hour perfecting her hair, spritzing on the perfume he once swore he couldn't resist. And for what? So she could sit across from her husband of 5 years and watch him destroy her in 10 words. "Elena, I want a divorce. I've met someone else." The world didn't slow down. It didn't give her time to process. She blinked, once, twice, waiting for him to take it back. Instead, Eric just sighed, setting his napkin down like this was just another business meeting. She wanted to scream, cry, flip the damn table, but all she could do was whisper, "Boo." And that's when she walked in. Vanessa. Elena didn't know her, but she didn't have to. She was younger, stunning, the kind of woman who looked expensive without trying. And worst of all, she knew. She knew who Elena was. She knew she was sitting across from a man who still wore his wedding ring. And yet, she walked over with a smirk and slid her arm through Eric's like she already owned him. Like Elena had never existed. And then Eric, her husband, the man she had built a life with, stood up and left with her. Just like that. No explanation, no remorse, not even a goddamn goodbye. But if Eric thought this was the end of Elena's story, he was about to find out exactly who he had underestimated. "What do you think?" The restaurant was too quiet. Not actually, but to Elena it felt like the entire world had gone silent. Like someone had pressed pause on everything except the sound of her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Eric was gone. Her husband, the man she had spent 5 years of her life with, had just walked out with another woman in front of her. And now, all she had left was an untouched filet mignon, a glass of red wine that suddenly tasted like acid, and the slow-burning humiliation creeping up her spine. It started with a whisper, not hers, theirs. Somewhere in the corner of the restaurant, a woman was murmuring to her date. A waiter lingered a second too long near her table, pretending to wipe a non-existent stain. The couple 2 tables over exchanged a look. Pity. They had all seen it, heard it. The betrayal, the humiliation. The moment, Elena's world shattered. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her water glass, trying to swallow the scream clawing up her throat. She wouldn't cry here. Not in front of them. Not in front of the strangers who were watching her, like she was a scene out of a movie they couldn't look away from. She grabbed her purse with shaky hands and forced herself to stand. Head high, shoulders back. If she was going to fall apart, it wouldn't be in the middle of a 5-star restaurant where Eric used to kiss her knuckles over candlelight. Not here, not in front of them. But as she took a step, the waiter, young, maybe early 20s, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, your bill has already been taken care of." She blinked, her stomach twisting. "By who?" The waiter hesitated. Then, with an uncomfortable glance toward the entrance, he answered, "Mr. Lancaster." He said to consider it a parting gift. And just like that, Elena's hands curled into fists. A parting gift? As if her entire marriage had been nothing more than a business transaction. As if leaving her for another woman was as easy as settling the check after a meal. The rage hit her like a tidal wave. The tears that had been threatening to spill evaporated. The humiliation twisted into something sharper, something colder. She turned on her heel, her voice ice cold. "Tell Mr. Lancaster," she said, enunciating every word, "that I don't accept charity from men who can't even look their wives in the eye when they destroy them." Then, with every ounce of dignity she had left, Elena walked out. But what Eric didn't know, what he would never see coming, was that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Elena barely remembered the drive home. The city lights blurred past her windshield, neon streaks bleeding into the night like smeared paint. She kept her grip tight on the steering wheel, nails digging into the leather as she replayed the scene over and over again in her mind. Eric's voice, Vanessa's smirk, the whispers, the pity, the damn check. Her knuckles went white. A parting gift. Her husband, the man she'd given 5 years of her life to, had tossed her aside like a worn-out accessory and had the audacity to think money would soften the blow. It wasn't the betrayal that made her stomach turn, it was the ease. Eric hadn't hesitated, hadn't stumbled over his words, hadn't even had the decency to look guilty. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment, like she was just another deal to finalize. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through her. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the house loomed in the darkness, silent, cold, empty. Just like her marriage. Elena pushed through the front door, kicked off her heels, and dropped her purse onto the entry table with a thud. The silence wrapped around her like a noose. No familiar scent of Eric's cologne. No half-empty glass of whiskey on the counter. No soft sound of a shower running upstairs. He was really gone. Her knees nearly buckled. With shaking hands, she reached for a bottle of wine on the counter. She didn't bother with a glass, just twisted off the cap and took a long, burning sip. She needed the numbness. She stumbled toward the living room, barely making it to the couch before the weight of it all came crashing down on her. And then, finally, she broke. A choked sob tore from her throat, and she let it. She let the tears come, let the pain spread through her ribs, let the humiliation settle into her bones. Because the truth was, Elena hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost her best friend, her sense of security, her entire goddamn future. And the worst part, she had never seen it coming. There were no warning signs, no late-night phone calls, no lipstick stains, no sudden fights. Nothing. Just a plate of steak, 10 words, and a younger woman walking into a restaurant like she already owned the man Elena had spent years loving. She squeezed her eyes shut. Maybe if she had been more exciting, maybe if she hadn't been so predictable, maybe if she had worn lingerie more often or planned spontaneous trips or... No. Elena's eyes snapped open, the rage hitting her like a thunderclap. She was not going to do this. She was not going to sit here and rewrite her past to justify a man who didn't even have the decency to say goodbye. She wiped her face, sitting up straighter. Eric hadn't left because of her. He had left because he wanted to. Because men like Eric, entitled, arrogant men, thought they could trade in loyalty for something shinier. And for the first time since he had walked out of that restaurant, Elena felt something other than heartbreak. She felt hatred. Not the irrational, bitter kind. The cold, calculated kind. The kind that didn't want to scream, cry, or beg. The kind that wanted to make him regret ever thinking she was disposable. She grabbed her phone, scrolling down to his contact. The same number she had memorized years ago. Her thumb hovered over it. She could call, demand an explanation, scream at him for shattering her like this. Or she could make a promise, not to him, to herself. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't chase. She would rise. And when Eric finally realized what he had thrown away, it would already be too late. If you love juicy drama and unforgettable twists like this, subscribe, and drop a comment. What would you do in Elena's shoes? Let's talk. The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Hotel was bathed in golden light, the chandeliers dripping with opulence, the soft hum of an elegant string quartet filling the air. Elena paused at the entrance, letting the scene unfold before her like a movie. Glasses clinked. Laughter rippled through the space. A sea of wealth and power swirled before her, adorned in the finest fabrics, the sharpest tuxedos, the kind of effortless luxury she had once been a part of. And then, like a predator sensing its prey, she felt it. His eyes, watching, lingering, exactly as she had intended. Elena took a slow, measured step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that seemed to command attention. And attention she received. Men turned their heads. Women whispered behind jeweled hands. Because Elena was not the same woman who had been abandoned over a plate of overpriced steak. Tonight, she was a vision. Her gown, black, sleek, sculpted to perfection, moved with her like liquid shadow. A slit ran dangerously high, revealing toned legs that had carried her through hell and back. And her face, flawless. Lips painted in the same blood-red shade she had worn that night. Only this time, it wasn't for Eric. It was for her. The moment she descended the stairs, whispers spread like wildfire. Who is that? God, she's stunning. Wait, isn't that Elena Whitmore? She ignored them, her eyes locked on one person and one person only. Eric. And there he was, standing near the bar, frozen, a glass of whiskey halfway to his lips. The moment their gazes collided, something shifted in the air. Shock, nostalgia, regret. Elena took her time walking toward the center of the room, making sure he absorbed every detail. The way the dress clung to her body, the way her confidence radiated like a force field, the way she was untouchable. A waiter passed by, and without missing a beat, she plucked a flute of champagne from the tray, bringing it to her lips as if she had never spent nights crying over him. Eric swallowed hard. He looked different, slightly disheveled, a little less sure of himself. The confident arrogance he had once worn like armor was cracked. And then, she saw her. Vanessa. At his side, dressed in shimmering gold, her grip on Eric's arm just a little too tight, like she could sense the shift in him, like she could feel him slipping. Elena almost smiled, but she wasn't here for pettiness. No, she was here to remind Eric of one thing. Men like him never truly realize a woman's worth until she stops needing them. The moment stretched, heavy, charged, and then he moved. Eric set his glass down and started toward her, his gaze intense, his steps unsteady. Elena didn't flinch. She simply raised her glass and took another sip, waiting. For the first time in months, the power was hers. Elena. Her name left his lips like a prayer. She arched a brow, feigning mild interest as Eric stepped closer. His voice was lower than she remembered, rough around the edges, not as smooth, not as sure. Elena, he repeated, this time softer. You look incredible. She took another slow sip of her champagne, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Do I? She mused, tilting her head. Well, that's what happens when you stop carrying dead weight. A muscle in his jaw ticked. There it was. That tiny flicker of guilt. Good. Eric ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, exhaling as if the weight of something unbearable sat on his shoulders. Elena, No, she cut him off, voice like silk. I'm just here to enjoy the gala. No need for small talk. She turned slightly, as if ready to walk away, but Eric stepped forward, too close. His scent was familiar. The cologne, the faint trace of whiskey, the warmth of his body invading her space. But it didn't make her weak anymore. Elena, please, he murmured. I need to talk to you. She exhaled, forcing herself to meet his eyes. About what, Eric? The divorce you blindsided me with? Or the woman you walked out with like I never existed? His throat bobbed. His hand clenched into a fist at his side. And then he cracked. It wasn't what I thought it would be, he admitted, his voice raw. Vanessa, she's... He exhaled sharply, searching for the words. She's not you. Elena refused to react. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She's cold, calculated. Everything about our relationship is a transaction. I thought I was gaining something, but all I did was lose the best thing that ever happened to me. His confession might have meant something once, but now? It was too late. She took a deliberate step back. Sounds like a you problem. Eric's brows furrowed, his hand almost reaching for her before he thought better of it. I made a mistake, he said, his voice quieter now. I miss you, Elena. And that's when Vanessa appeared. Gliding toward them in her shimmering gold dress, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a warning. She knew, and she wasn't happy. Elena, Vanessa greeted with a saccharine smile, looping her arm through Eric's. Didn't expect to see you here tonight. Then again, I suppose you're enjoying the charity events now that you don't have to worry about paying bills. Elena smirked, unfazed. Vanessa, she replied smoothly. I see you're still mistaking men for investments. A flash of something dark crossed Vanessa's icy blue eyes, but her expression remained poised. Elena and I were just catching up. Eric interjected quickly, his tone careful. Vanessa's grip on his arm tightened. Were they already cracking? Interesting. Elena tilted her head, amused. Yes, Eric was just telling me about his regrets. Vanessa's smile stiffened. Oh? And here I thought he'd finally moved on from the past. Elena's lips curled into something almost pitying. Moved on? She let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. Sweetheart, your man just told me he made a mistake. Vanessa's fingers dug into Eric's arm. Eric stiffened, eyes darting between them, suddenly realizing the storm he had just unleashed. And Elena? She simply lifted her glass and took another slow sip, enjoying every second. Elena didn't flinch, didn't let the weight of Eric's words touch her. Not the way they once would have. There was a time when hearing him say I miss you would have shattered her into 1,000 desperate, hopeful pieces. Now, she felt nothing. Or no, not nothing. Amusement. Because this was pathetic. Eric Lancaster, the man who had humiliated her, discarded her, left her sitting alone in a restaurant while he walked away with another woman, was now standing before her, pleading. Like she was the one who had power now. And maybe she was. Elena let the silence stretch, watching the way Eric's fingers flexed at his sides. The way Vanessa, still latched onto his arm, barely masked the flicker of panic in her icy blue eyes. She knew that Eric had meant every word. And that was delicious. Elena exhaled, tilting her head. "Eric," she said, voice measured, calm. "You don't get to do this." His brows furrowed. "Do what?" "Pretend to be the victim," she replied simply. "Not after what you did." Eric inhaled sharply, but she didn't give him the chance to respond. "You didn't just leave me," she continued, her tone light, almost casual. "You erased me, tossed me aside like I was a mistake, like the years we spent together meant nothing. Elena, you humiliated me." Her voice remained steady, even as she saw the flicker of something, guilt, flash in his blue eyes. "And you didn't even have the decency to say goodbye." Eric's face paled. Vanessa, however, smirked. "Oh, Elena," she said, shaking her head, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're still so dramatic." Elena turned to her, unfazed. "And you're still threatened," she noted. "That's why you're standing here like you have something to prove." Vanessa's eyes darkened. Eric sighed, dragging a hand over his face. This was a mistake. Elena let out a soft, almost pitying laugh. "Finally," she mused, lifting her champagne glass. "Something we can agree on." Eric flinched. Vanessa tugged him closer. "Come on, babe," she said, her voice sharp now, forced. "We have more important people to talk to." Elena smiled, and just like that, it was over. Or so she thought. That night, as she kicked off her heels in her apartment, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. "Eric, a single message. Can we talk? Please." Elena exhaled, staring at the screen. And for the first time in a long time, she had the power to choose. Do you think people like Eric truly regret their choices, or do they only miss what they lost? Let me know what you think in the comments. Eric isn't done yet, and Elena, she's not the same woman he left. Elena hadn't thought about Eric since that night. Not really. Sure, his text sat unread on her phone, a lingering ghost of the past. But she had moved on. Truly. That was until Olivia, her best friend, her voice of reason, slammed a martini onto the table at their usual rooftop bar and leaned in with a wicked grin. "You're not gonna believe this." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That good?" "Oh, sweetheart," Olivia smirked. "That delicious." She pulled out her phone, tapping rapidly before shoving the screen toward Elena. And there it was. Vanessa, not with Eric, but with another man, a very married one. Arms tangled around his neck, lips barely inches apart, the kind of embrace that made it undeniable. Elena blinked. "Wow, right?" Olivia grinned, sipping her drink. "Apparently it's been going on for months. Guess Eric wasn't the upgrade she hoped for." Elena exhaled, setting down her glass. This should have been satisfying. The ultimate revenge served cold, effortless. And yet, all she felt was pity. Not for Vanessa, for Eric. For the man who had thrown everything away, for this. Olivia leaned forward, eyes glinting. "So, you gonna tell him?" Elena stared at the screen, at the evidence of his inevitable downfall. She had the power to destroy him, or to let karma take care of it. She tapped her nails against the glass, considering. Then she smiled, and said, "I think I'll sleep on it." Should Elena tell Eric the truth, or let karma handle it? What would you do in her position? Spill the tea in the comments. Elena didn't dress up for this. No stunning gowns, no statement heels, no red lipstick meant to haunt his dreams. Just a simple black turtleneck, jeans, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had nothing to prove. When she stepped into the coffee shop, Eric was already there. Tapping his fingers anxiously against his cup, scanning the door like a man waiting for a lifeline. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Elena?" She slid into the seat across from him, her expression unreadable. "Eric?" A long silence stretched between them. It was the first time they had been alone since the night he walked out of that restaurant, the last time he had been so sure. Now, he looked wrecked. "You look," he finally said. She sipped her coffee, giving nothing away. "I know." He let out a short, breathless laugh, like he didn't expect that response. But then his expression turned serious. "Elena, He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I messed up." She arched a brow. "You did." "I was stupid, blinded." He exhaled sharply, gripping his cup like it was the only thing grounding him. "Vanessa, she wasn't what I thought." Elena tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "Oh," she was cold, calculating, like I was just another status symbol to her. "And the worst part?" He let out a bitter chuckle. "She was cheating on me, the whole time." Elena took another sip of coffee, barely suppressing a smirk. Of course, she already knew. And yet, Seeing Eric sitting here, broken, regretful, desperate, it wasn't as satisfying as she once imagined. Because the truth was, she was over it. Over him, over the pain, over the nights she used to spend wondering why she wasn't enough. Now she saw the situation for what it really was. Eric hadn't suddenly realized her worth. He had only realized his mistake. "Elena, I miss you." His voice was almost pleading. "I miss us." She finally set her cup down, meeting his gaze head-on. "No, Eric, you miss the woman who loved you blindly." His lips parted, stunned by the cold finality in her voice. "You don't miss me. You miss having someone who adored you, even when you didn't deserve it." She leaned forward, dropping the final blow with a smirk. "And I hate to break it to you, but that woman, she's gone." Eric sat frozen, realization dawning in his eyes. Eric swallows hard, looking like a man who just lost everything. Would you have given Eric a second chance, or was Elena right to walk away? Drop your thoughts below. Elena stood up slowly from the table, leaving behind a silence heavy with regret and unresolved longing. The soft murmur of the cafe fell away, as if even the clinking of coffee cups dared not disturb her. Across from her, Eric's eyes pleaded for another chance. But his desperation was met with the unwavering strength of someone who had already reclaimed her life. With a measured calm, she fixed him with a look that pierced the lingering echoes of their shared past. Then, in a voice steady and clear, she uttered the sentence that would sever their last fragile connection. "You lost me, and I found myself." The words fell between them like a gavel, decisive and final. In that instant, the weight of years, of unreturned love, silent sacrifices, and bitter betrayals dissipated from her shoulders. Elena's eyes, once filled with the remnants of hurt and hope, now shone with an unyielding resolve. There was no trace of the woman who had once craved his validation. In her place stood someone reborn from the ashes of her heartbreak. Eric's face contorted with a mix of shock and anguish. For a few long, agonizing seconds, he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The sound of his faltering breath was the only response to the clarity of her dismissal. Across the table, Vanessa, whose presence had once been an open wound, watched silently, her eyes narrowing as if the truth itself were a weapon pointed at her. Elena gathered her purse and slid off her chair. With each step towards the exit, the clamor of the cafe faded further into insignificance. She wasn't leaving in haste, she was leaving with purpose. Every footfall was a declaration of independence, a reminder to herself that her identity was no longer defined by the loss of a man who never truly valued her. Outside, the cool night air greeted her like an old friend. The city's lights shimmered in the distance, a tapestry of endless possibilities. She paused on the sidewalk, taking a moment to breathe in the freedom that now enveloped her. This was the life she had painstakingly built for herself, a life filled with quiet victories, moments of self-discovery, and the unwavering knowledge that she was enough. A smile, subtle yet triumphant, tugged at the corners of her lips. Elena knew that every scar, every tear had led her to this defining moment. She recalled the nights of restless sleep, the solitary walks home under the weight of despair, and the quiet mornings that began with a resolve to be stronger than yesterday. All of it culminated in this singular, liberating moment. Her phone buzzed softly in her purse, a reminder of the lingering threads of the past. But now, she was in control. The message on the screen, an echo of Eric's desperate attempts to recapture what was lost, no longer carried any power over her. With a casual flick of her thumb, she silenced it. Some things were meant to remain in the past. As she strode down the bustling sidewalk, a vibrant mosaic of voices and city sounds enveloped her. The familiar energy of the urban night was both comforting and invigorating. Every step she took was a step away from the ghost of her old life, and a stride toward the life she was determined to create. The future was wide open, and she was ready to embrace every opportunity it promised. Her heart beat steadily, a rhythmic reminder of the strength pulsing through her veins. She recalled the countless moments when she doubted herself, when the pain seemed too great to overcome. And now, standing here, she recognized that each trial had only forged her resilience. In the rearview mirror of her memories, the figure of Eric blurred into insignificance, replaced by the luminous image of her own reflection. The city around her buzzed with life, a living, breathing testament to new beginnings. Neon signs flickered, Street performers entertained passersby, and somewhere in the distance, the hum of a late-night jazz band spilled out from a hidden speakeasy. Elena's steps grew lighter as she merged into the night, every stride a silent celebration of her rebirth. In that moment, as she crossed a busy intersection, a subtle shift in the crowd caught her attention. Among the throng of well-dressed individuals, a handsome stranger stood waiting at the curb. His eyes, dark and observant, met hers for just a heartbeat, a moment of silent acknowledgement that hinted at untold stories and uncharted possibilities. For a fleeting second, the world around her seemed to hold its breath. Elena's gaze lingered on him, curiosity and intrigue mingling with her newfound sense of freedom. The stranger's smile was enigmatic, and there was an air of mystery about him that promised adventures yet to come. It was as if fate had orchestrated this encounter, a gentle reminder that life was full of unexpected turns and new beginnings. As she walked past him, the stranger's eyes followed her, a spark of interest igniting in his dark gaze. For a moment, Elena hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because the future, once filled with the echoes of a painful past, now shimmered with the potential of something entirely new. The intersection of her newfound independence and his captivating presence was a silent invitation, a promise that her journey was far from over. If you were Elena, she mused to herself with a hint of irony and genuine amusement, would you have forgiven him or walked away? The question echoed in the spaces between her confident strides, a challenge to anyone who'd ever been tempted to compromise their worth for the sake of a fading love. The city continued its relentless pace, indifferent yet vibrant, as Elena embraced the night with all its possibilities. The memory of Eric and the pain he had inflicted no longer haunted her steps. Instead, they fueled her determination to step boldly into a future where she was the master of her destiny. And so, as the handsome stranger's gaze held hers for one more lingering moment, a smile tugged at the corners of her lips, an unspoken promise that the best was yet to come. The future beckoned, and Elena stepped into it, unapologetic, unstoppable, and undeniably free. Now, what would you have done? If you were in Elena's shoes, would you have forgiven Eric or walked away? Let's debate in the comments. And if you love stories filled with drama, betrayal, and sweet revenge, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.